Welcome to our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Here we're going to take a deep dive into the minds of some really daring, impactful change makers. I'm your host, Gill Hunter, and I'm the managing partner at Square One Law. In each episode, we're going to meet some innovators, some trailblazers, and we're going to talk about their successes, their fears, their challenges, and their lived experiences. We're going to understand their secrets to their resilience and their source of their passion, so that we can understand what drives them to achieve. These are all leaders who inspire us to step out of our own comfort zones and fear less, do more. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Today I'm joined by Emma Banks, who is the CEO of Ramarketing, and she's here to talk about all things life sciences and more. Hi, Emma.
Oh, hey, Jill.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's always good to see you. You always brighten up a room.
With my varied colours, yeah.
Yes, I like that. It's good. It's always good to be distinctive, isn't it? And
totally.
It's, particularly in the busy world that we live in, which is highly competitive, you've got to find ways to stand out.
I totally agree.
And looking at your sort of career path, it stands out as well. You've gone from being an academic, doing a PhD and postdoctorate research, through to a science, and then you've ended up as a marketeer.
Yeah.
So how's that happened?
Well, I'll go right back to when I was 17, because I think it's quite important, actually. So at 17, I was absolutely adamant I was going to be a medical doctor. And sadly, one of my teachers told me I wasn't smart enough to do it.
No.
And
words of encouragement.
I know. And it's funny because I'm married to a teacher now, and I relay this story to him, and he's like, well, they have to be realistic. And I'm like, yeah, but Ian, look at me. So I listened, unfortunately, and then went off and did a sort of medical degree in London. And I think there was probably a bit of me that had something to prove. So I've been told I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. So I'm like, well, I'm coming out of university in a recession. What am I going to do? And applied to do a PhD. So went up to Liverpool. I did actually go to Liverpool because of a man. That was my chosen city for all the right reasons, clearly. Did a PhD, didn't really enjoy it very much. It's hard. I think it's harder than you think, and it's probably less about being smart and a lot more about grit and determination. But I suppose at the end of that, I thought, well, I need to decide, is lab bench research going to be my life? So I did a postdoc and went back to London, and hated it, like genuinely hated it, and had a sort of big personal challenge right near the end of that, which took me out of that environment. And I had to really think about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I mean, it was one of those moments. I was 24, and thought, what is it now? So this probably isn't on my CV, started training as an acupuncturist.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that.
So I did 3 years of training in London just at weekends. And in that process started to have a family. And I loved acupuncture because it was as close as I was going to get to medicine, if you like, in terms of patient contact. And I loved the philosophy of it and all that kind of thing. And there was an element to it which was validated. In other words, it wasn't just sort of, in my mind anyway, something really, really out there that people would go, really? How does this work? But then got a job in clinical trials because I needed to earn a living and pay for the fees for the acupuncture. And of course, I suppose, with every good plan, as I started to have children, and I ended up with 3 under 4.
Ooh.
Yeah. Regular money was really important. And I was enjoying the work, clinical trials. It was the data side, but it was interesting work. And acupuncture I was doing on the side, but it became progressively harder to do that, raise a family, and knowing that if I could work, regular hours and get regular money, then I was contributing to the family. So it went by the wayside, sadly. I mean, it's funny, we were clearing out the loft the other day and I found some of my acupuncture needles, and I'm like, oh, I'd love to go back to that, but it's just now it would just be such hard work to get back into it.
I think it's really, it's really interesting, that blend from your sort of very traditional science background with the more holistic approach as well. So you decided you were not smart enough to be a doctor, but you got involved in clinical trials. When you say you got involved in clinical trials, what does that mean?
Well, because I needed to pay my fees for my acupuncture training, I took any job. I was literally looking for £10,000 a year. Like, that was my goal.
Right.
So I was applying for all sorts, anything that I could find. And I found this job doing data entry. So in the old days, we collect clinical trial information on paper, and then people have to enter it into a database. And so I started doing data entry, and I remember being interviewed by this company, and the guy interviewed me. He said, "You really want to do this with a PhD?" And I'm a bit like, "Yes, I just want to do acupuncture, so I don't care what I do." Yeah. But of course, what you probably don't realise when you're that age, and I look back on it now and I go, there were other things about me that were of value to that business. And doing a PhD and having to go through a Viva, the one thing I would say is I learned sales very quickly, because even though that sounds like I've made stuff up, when you've got to defend your work, that's essentially a sales skill, isn't it? When you're trying to convince somebody that what you sell or what you're doing is best for them. And I think I just took to it and enjoyed it and got promoted, and almost the rest is history. But I went through everything. I went through leading a team, doing selling, going to conference and standing on booths. You just do the whole thing. And then latterly ended up in Newcastle. Now, my husband is a Geordie, and he was like, "I want to go back." I'm like, "Well, what am I going to do?" But this job appeared in the clinical trial arena. So ended up in the Northeast, and the kids had been born in the South, and we moved up here when my youngest was just about to start school. So it worked really well. They now, if you heard them speak now, you wouldn't know they weren't born here. It's just, and worked my way through, I suppose, up to a sort of board position and then a CEO of this smaller software data company, and went through the whole process of trying to find money and applying for grants, and then we were acquired, and then we sold a bit, and it just, that whole process of it we were constantly on the hamster wheel of trying to find the money, the next phase, the growth. And I think I'm a very loyal person, so I didn't want to walk away from that particular role because of the team that I'd built and the people I was working with. But I remember it was sort of mid-2018, and my father at the time had just had a terminal cancer diagnosis. He was fairly elderly. And I remember going to see him in the summer and him saying to me, because I used to talk to him a lot about business and work and that kind of thing, and he just said, "Isn't it about time that you put yourself before everybody else?" And so then at this point, Raman, who's the founder of Ramarketing, had approached me for the role. And I literally, when he approached me, I'm like, "You're insane. Why would I come and run a marketing agency?" What a ridiculous decision. But, if you know Raman, he's a charmer and charismatic, and he sold it to me. And after some soul searching, I went for an interview with them. And then obviously the rest is history. And quite honestly, I wouldn't have been interested in it if it hadn't been in the pharma sector, if it hadn't been in the world that I knew so well. But it's genuinely the best decision I've ever made. And since then, I know what's beautiful about it now is I am not the expert in the room. Whereas in my previous role, I was the one that got rolled out. We've got a quality assurance question, or we've got a data question, and it would be me. Now I'm not that person. And yes, I've learned and I understand what we do and all that kind of thing. But my role is leadership now, and that really gets me excited. Like, I think that's to be in a position where if you get it right, because we don't always get it right because we're humans, it changes the way someone sees something, or it develops them or helps them move forward or be more fulfilled, that is an incredible opportunity and responsibility. So that's why it's so brilliant.
Very clear that culture is really important to you, and authenticity and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm a big believer, that the leader in the business sets the tone for that. And that's something I really admire about you, is that you've always been really authentic. Mm-hmm. You have got green hair. Sometimes it's pink. It's, but you are you. What do you think makes a really, really good culture?
Culture's a weird word, isn't it? Because we all talk about culture, and I actually think culture changes all of the time, and it could be different in different pockets of the business. And I suppose just through learning, I guess, and observing, I actually think it's having a really, really strong set of values and holding everyone to account to those. Because the people you have in your business, they make the culture, but they have to be hung on something. It has to be hung on something. In other words, if you have a strong set of values that you as a leader live by and that everyone else can then feel, I suppose, they feel like they belong there because of these particular values, then you can let the culture take care of itself. Clearly, there are always issues in businesses like disgruntlement over something, or there's something going on over there that people don't like. And part of the importance of the values is, well, one of our values is be genuine. It's like, well, that's not working. What are we going to do about it? So rather than being, I can't think of the right word, almost protecting the decision that, say, I've made, because I don't want to admit that I've made a mistake, it's far better to go, yeah, you're right, it's not working. We need to do something different. Because that then builds that trust, because actually trust is probably key within all of this. So I love it, the fact that our business, since I joined at the start of 2019, its core set of values haven't really changed. They've been slightly refined, but the culture clearly has, because new people have joined, people from different countries have joined. That changes the culture, but why can't we just embrace that? That's okay.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I mean, you said that you've got people from different countries have joined, and you've had quite a big international expansion. How much has that shaped the business and I suppose the culture as well?
So, we've literally just opened an office in Canada, in Toronto, and we've been in the States for, well, probably since I joined, really, the start of 2019, because that's when Raman relocated to Boston. And I don't think it's been easy. We have a very Geordie way about us, having been headquartered in the Northeast. One of our values is actually be canny, and quite often people go, what does that even mean? And then you'll hear the different explanations of what canny means to them, which is great. But I think back to the values again, I mean, I could bang this drum forever. If we're hiring to those values, then in some ways, irrespective of region of the world, you will find people who can buy into that, but who are very different, because particularly in the US, because it's just this incredible melting pot of different cultures and different ethnicities. And I mean, actually, Toronto is probably one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the world. All of a sudden, you've got this incredible opportunity, and I think that what we've got to always be better at is accepting that people have diverse opinions or a different way of seeing the world that actually enriches what we do. It isn't that we want everyone to be the same. We don't want everyone to think the way that we think. We want people to bring their fresh ideas, and that has to come from their experiences and how they were raised and where they lived and what their family are. And so I think if we can be better at that, then probably the connections we build as we grow internationally will be stronger. But it is values-based hiring, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think all the pieces have to fit, though, don't they? So it's no point in just recruiting people for the sake of diversity, because you think it's got to be led by you. And I think the fact that you're able to say to your people, I want to hear your views, and actually, no, I've got that wrong, that, like you say, it builds the trust, and you will get more of that. You'll get more input and more. How do you keep everybody happy if everybody's got a different view about what should happen?
Well, basically you don't, do you? Because none of us are happy all of the time. Probably one of the biggest challenges that we face, or any business faces as it grows, is creating the space for people to express how they feel throughout the organisation without it all having to come back to the top. That's one of the hardest things, I think, because I have the confidence that if I spoke to people in the business, I could probably find things out and take action almost in the same breath, because I have that
That's what you do.
Yes, exactly. But what you've got to do is create an environment where that's happening everywhere. And I think that's challenged us. That's been hard. But ultimately, people need to know that if they're not happy, they can say, and somebody will listen. And if action can't be taken, that's explained to them, rather than assuming that they're just complaining, and sometimes people do just complain, but they kind of need to, don't they? So we all need to complain. But as long as there's an element of listening and action, or no action with explanation, then that's the best you can do. I don't sit here thinking I have to try and keep everyone happy, because I remember we did a bit of an employee experience project when I first started. I remember the lady we worked with, she said, everyone has 100% choice over whether they work here or not. I'm like, we forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you as a business can't give somebody what they want in a long-term way, then they have 100% choice not to be there, I think. And I encourage that. I'm like, if you're not happy here and we can't give you what you need, you know what you can do.
Yeah. But that's quite brave. That's quite fearless to be, particularly for somebody who's very talented, but they don't get the culture or don't buy in the values, to accept that you might lose a really important skill within the business. Or, if it's a salesperson, you might lose sales for a period of time. Yeah. That's quite a brave decision to go, actually, you don't fit and you're never going to fit and it's never going to work. And if you can't change, then it looks like there's only one option here.
Yeah. But often I'll position it the other way, which is much more about we as a business can't be what you want, rather than make it about them. Yeah. It's much more about the business environment we've created, and it may just not be a fit. And people are taken aback when you have, I've had it a few times in my time at Ramarketing, where I've sat down with somebody and said, if you're not happy and we can't resolve that, we've tried, then no one should be unhappy at work. No one.
No, you've always spent far too much time at work to be unhappy or dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody really wants to be in a job where they're complaining and grumbling all the time. No. Most people want to be fulfilled by what they do for 80% of the time during the week.
I know, so right. Yeah.
So you've been in the life sciences and pharma arena for the whole of your career, really. And it's an interesting time for that sector at the moment. And I know you're very heavily involved with Bio now as well. What do you see as being the real pivotal challenges that the sector has at the moment?
I suppose there's a few things. COVID gave the sector a real boost. Clearly, the sector basically gave us our lives back. But what that did, I think, is created almost an artificial upturn in work and capacity and all that kind of thing. And of course, I think right now we're coming back to normal levels. So I know the sector in various pockets are finding that painful as they're having to readjust to growth, still growth, but almost like the COVID years have to be taken out of the trajectory.
Yeah,
it's like a big peak, and then it's coming. It feels like we've slowed down when in fact we haven't. When you do the analysis, like most people are saying, we are growing as an industry, but just not at the same level as we did 2020, 2021. So there's that. There's obviously then the inflationary pressures and the cost of supply chain and the price of everything going up, which is creating challenge and obviously reducing available money, nervousness at the funding end, depending on where you are in that process, whether it's VC. Apparently the private equity market is relatively buoyant, but you have to be revenue generating for private equity. So there's more nervousness up probably at the other end. I mean, there's a heap of things that have probably come together to make it a more challenging time. Having said that, there's so many brilliant innovations. I mean, there's great work even in the Northeast region. We're traditionally very good at manufacturing, but there's some good innovation now, some sort of innovator companies in the region who are forging ahead despite this. And this developing new therapies is not cheap. This is very expensive, and particularly once you go into the human trials, you're burning through cash. But so back to the innovation, I think what we've got is lots of conversation about cell and gene therapy and the idea that we can have very, very precision or specialist medicine. But it's interesting because when you read about it, it's phenomenal from a scientific point of view, like it's really exciting. But people are still not sure whether it's going to be as exciting as they think, because the other challenge, and I feel we're quite far removed from this, but I think about it a lot, is our healthcare systems are also now breaking. So we create therapies that cost, for the sake of argument, £1 million for a treatment for one patient. and you've got an overburdened healthcare system. Like, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
So I know we've spoken to a few of our clients who are talking about how they're trying to make the actual development of the therapy more efficient because everything you do quicker and better. So this is why AI is a big exciting area, I suppose. You do everything bigger and better, then you can reduce time to get to the market. Therefore, of course, you're reducing the cost, and therefore you hope the price of the therapy then can
come down.
Yeah. But I do think that there's a real challenge ahead in terms of science can take us wherever we want to go. You know, we can do all sorts of incredible things. That doesn't necessarily mean it can economically translate to treatment.
So you've identified there that AI may be one of the things that helps to increase those efficiencies. What about the sort of regulatory side of it? Is that helpful or not? Does it need to change? Should it change? You know, it's there the regulatory side of it and the clinical trials and everything is there to protect the population. But it sounds like there's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg. It needs to be faster and more efficient, but provide the same level of protection. Would regulatory change help?
I mean, of course it would. And I also think I'm sure I read recently that there's some work going on to almost use a bit of what happened during COVID, because during COVID, it was unprecedented what the regulators had to do.
Yeah.
They were almost, in simple terms, reviewing data as it was arriving. Now, that doesn't usually happen. You do your trial, you package up your data, you submit it, and then, you know, the process happens. But COVID gave us the option for remote audit. So because sites have to be audited by the regulators, people putting cameras in sites so people can actually remote inspect. Like I say, the review through a clinical trial process being sort of hand in glove. But they haven't, as far as I know anyway, they haven't gone back. They haven't embraced the COVID approach as a sort of way of operating. But I do think that is creating some questioning of the process and how can we use the best parts of that to make it more efficient and streamlined without, like, as you say, you know, sacrificing any kind of safety or efficacy checking. I don't know. I mean, somebody in our team wrote a brilliant blog, actually, I think it's just went out this week, about disease X, and that lots of companies are now planning for another pandemic and trying to get ahead of that. And it's that kind of thing that is probably going to need to happen almost to mitigate, in some areas anyway, mitigate the time that it takes to get new therapy to market.
Yeah. Increase the likelihood of it actually reaching the people who
Yes,
need it.
That's right.
Rather than being a successful therapy that nobody can afford to implement.
So true. Yeah.
Okay. I'll ask you something completely different now.
Okay.
So you have always been a big champion of inclusivity and diversity, and particularly you're very vocal about women's rights in the workplace, particularly around menopause.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a woman in her 50s, it's an area of immense interest to a lot of us. So tell me about that. Tell me about what you've done at Ramarketing around that and why you're so passionate about it.
So, I mean, I guess, you know, this is born out of my own personal experience first and foremost, which, you know, sometimes I reflect on that and go, well, I should have been thinking about this before, but often it doesn't enter your head. And I think that's actually part of the problem. As a younger woman, you're not even thinking about it. So, you know, when everything started for me from a perimenopause perspective, I resisted it, I suppose, and also had this sense that I couldn't talk about it and I couldn't express how I was feeling, or physically or emotionally, if you like. And sort of at home, I'm thinking, what do I do? How do I deal with this? Do I go down the sort of the sort of herbal or non-HRT route? And what do I do? And then there's this brilliant organisation called Newson Health, which is spearheaded by Louise Newson, and it was getting an awful lot of press, I suppose, because she was basically saying HRT is not as dangerous as everyone thinks it is, and actually it has all this other health benefit. It's not just going to fix your hot flushes, it's actually going to fix everything else. So I suppose I was a bit torn, and the thing that really dawned on me, and I'm a very open person, but I'm also in some areas very private. And when it comes to, and I don't know whether this isn't a good thing, but I think it just reflects probably the world I grew up in. A sign of weakness, showing weakness, is not really something that we or I have been comfortable with. And this was, for me, a real, almost like a fork in the road, which was, because of what was happening physically, it was changing the way that I could operate, but I didn't want anyone to know and I think this is probably 99% of women who are going through this process. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, the worst of my symptoms were occurring at the point we were starting to pitch to private equity companies. So over a period of probably 5 or 6 months, my symptoms were just going like that. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in these meetings knowing that there was an objective to get a private equity partner. And I do remember sitting in meetings and literally having hot flush after hot flush after hot flush and not saying anything and just doing the whole stoic, keep calm and carry on, all that kind of thing. And I did it and I got through it. But I also found it incredibly hard because for some reason I was not as quick and sharp. So I was sometimes sitting in front of a mound of things that I needed to sort and I couldn't find a way through. And that was the most terrifying. So the hot flushes for me were like, so of course, that's my personal story. I then dealt with that and I went and decided to get HRT. And then I did a bit of soul searching and thought, is it not time now for me to actually tell people? And there was also all the press around menopause. So I wrote that first blog. And I think it was a picture of me with all of the different things that I was taking. And also had dug out all these horrific statistics about women who are essentially in their prime, either giving up work, going part-time, dropping to a lower pressure role, all of this talent hemorrhaging out because of something that we have a solution to. Well, we certainly have the obvious solution, which is HRT. I appreciate it doesn't work for everyone. But also, perhaps we're not even talking about it. These women are just going through this in isolation. And these women are in our workforce. It's not like they're hidden away at home. They're actually in our place of work every day. So I wrote this blog and it created some more open dialogue. And I started talking about it. I'm sure people in the office are like, oh, here she goes again. Especially the younger women, they're like, and the blokes are like, oh, dear me. But my view is, well, you young ones need to hear about this because you need to be ready. I don't want any of you to have to go through what we are going through. So lots of conversations. People came out of the woodwork. Oh my God, I didn't realize. And I went and, I didn't realize because I'd lost my confidence when I went to see the GP and I was pushing them going, if the GP says no, push them. Because even our primary healthcare providers are not really that au fait with it. I'm like, push them. Here are the things I've been given. You can get them on the NHS, push them. And it's just created this incredible support network. And people are now very open about their experiences. And I always say, look, better to talk about it. If you're having a hard time, we have really flexible working. We're very lucky because we're office-based. I'm very, very liberal, I suppose, about it. I'm like, work from anywhere at any time. And I always say to people, whether it's menopause related or not, if you're having a bad day or you're having a difficult time, just stop. Go and get that walk or go and do something different and come back. Just work around this. Don't feel like you've got to power through, which is what I had done.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's just be a decent human.
Yeah.
How would you feel if it was you? Let's just have a think about that and take care of people.
Yeah, I always say to people, the sort of the inclusion bit, it's really just about having a good culture and having somewhere where people feel like they belong, which is usually about values and values being aligned. And if you can create that, then you will look after people because that's what you will do as part of that. And I think the menopause is. I think it's brilliant. I had a meeting with a client last week, and it was a male client who talked about the problems his daughter was having at 14 with her periods. Now, 10 years ago, you never would have heard the word period come out of a man's mouth, particularly in a business meeting with his lawyer. So we've made massive progress in that respect, and I think menopause is the same. It's getting a lot more attention where it needs to be, and it has to be because we've got a massive skills shortage.
Yeah, that's right.
And that big cohort of extremely talented women leaving, silently leaving because they don't feel like they can talk. And I think there's in female-run businesses like ours, it's probably easier for people to say that because it's the experience that I've had, but it does take the person who's leading also to be that, show that vulnerability and talk about their own experience. I mean, I went through menopause very early because I had cancer when in my 40s, so I went into early menopause, and there was no way that I could have talked about it at work. And it was exactly the same as you're talking, just sort of put up with it. And I think people think if they haven't been through it, or they haven't had a partner or a friend who's gone through it, they think it's all about hot flushes. But the worst thing is the brain fog, and that's where people panic and go, I can't do my job anymore, I'll have to stop. And I think a lot of employers will then approach it with, well, they can go part-time. But actually, you want those people with all that talent in the business. So how can we support them? And I think what you've said is really valuable. It's about just having those open conversations and people feeling that they've got the psychological safety to say, I'm struggling with this. And you find a way through it. So I think, it's brilliant what you're doing. So keep doing it. Keep flying the flag for us menopausal women. But it is appreciated. You're obviously passionate about the sector that you're in and the work that you do, the people that you're bringing on, menopausal people, everybody. What outside of work, what are your passions? What are the things that you enjoy?
Well, probably the most important passion for me is singing. And I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? When we don't sing, then it does make a difference to how I feel about work. So it's very, very connected because it's an outlet that's very different to sort of the position of responsibility that I hold during the day, if you like. And I'm really lucky because I sing with a beautiful choir called Voices of Hope. And many years ago, we actually won the Choir of the Year competition in the UK. And it's probably 20 people. It's a great group of people. We sing beautiful music. It's more classical than anything else, mainly a cappella, so unaccompanied. But it's a bit of a family, really. And we've been together since 2011, I think. So, if you think about, we've got quite a lot of the members have been in that mix for that long. And, we've been through families and people having babies and then people losing parents and, all that kind of thing. And it's just a fabulous group. And so singing is a massive part of my life, and with Voices of Hope, but also the opportunity to do the odd solo and stand out in front of a crowd and actually have to engage with them in a way that's very different to my job. And I love that. I mean, obviously it's one of those things that if it doesn't go as well as you'd like, that can actually be that's quite a negative experience because singing for me is me putting my entire heart and soul on show, because it's so much about who you are. But when you get a gig and it's gone well, then nothing replaces that. Nothing can compete with it. It's just a phenomenal experience, and it's something that I didn't do. So when my children were born, I was singing. Before they were born, I was singing in London, and then I had the kids and we relocated, and I didn't sing for probably nearly 10 years. But up here, because it's so far from London, in some ways, it has created its own sort of music or creative kind of world, because we're not competing. So where I lived before was Hertfordshire, and everything was in London. Like if you wanted really good quality anything, you had to go to London. Whereas here, this is where there is quality here, and it's a brilliant place. And I guess the other thing that I haven't done much of recently is the motorbike. And not that I ride, but touring, getting on the back with Ian and just disappearing off and enjoying that. That's again, I think probably I'm a bit of a secret adrenaline junkie, but there is something very. People will be like, "You're insane getting on a bike." I'm like, "Yes, but it's great when he goes really fast."
What's your favourite sort of tour that you've done on the bike?
Probably we took the bike to Shetland.
Right. You love Scotland, don't you?
Yeah, I love Scotland. I mean, I just love Scotland. But we took the bike to Shetland, and that was it. We had a disaster because the first day we were there, we had a flat tire. So we're in Shetland. Now, bearing in mind things only arrive on the island every 24 hours. Ian's like, "That's it, we're done now," because I bet you there's not even a bike shop, let alone a tire on this island. And luckily, we'd found the only bike shop on the island before. And he had recovery, so we got recovered to this bike shop somewhere on the other side of the island. And apparently Ian said he opened the garage and there's just all these bike tyres. So that was lucky. But yeah, no, Shetland was stunning on the bike. But but yeah, I mean, I just being out on it is fantastic, and being together and in a and we do talk to each other, although I think sometimes Ian's a bit like, don't talk to me anymore. Like, that's enough talk. We're going to concentrate.
You've got the intercoms.
Yes,
so
we do.
Yeah.
And sometimes he does turn his off.
Without telling you.
Yeah, so I'm just talking to myself in the back. But no, it's great. That's really great. We haven't done it for a while, actually. It would be good to get back on the back.
Well, that's what I was going to. My sort of final question for you is, we've talked a lot about the sort of the fearless side of things and the things that you've done. What in the future, what would you like to do more of?
I mean, I suppose there's a number of streams to that. I would love to continue to learn about leadership, I suppose, and I think I mentioned earlier, this idea of if you can be an exceptional leader, the impact that has on other people, like how that can bring them on, develop them, support them, that kind of thing. And, I want to continue to do that for a period of time, whether that's, full-time or in some other capacity. Because I love that. I think that's, it is in itself, it's a calling, I suppose. Always more music, like always more singing. But ultimately, I suppose I'd love us to for Ian and I particularly, just go and live on the side of a loch in Scotland and live and have loads of dogs and just live that kind of that outside quiet life. Although he is convinced I won't be able to cope with it because my brain is always on. But yeah, I mean, I think just more. It probably sounds horribly emotional, but I genuinely get such a buzz out of seeing other people be successful, and it's so lovely to know that you might have had a small part in that, and I would like more of that, I think.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I find you a really inspirational leader, and I'm sure working with you, your people will too. So I'm pretty sure you'll tick that box. So
Thanks,
thanks ever so much for talking to me today, Emma. It's been fascinating and interesting, as always. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Fear Less, Do More. All of our guests come from a diverse range of backgrounds, but they all share a common drive to face their fears, take action, and create meaningful impact. If you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast, please follow us, Square One Law, on Instagram and LinkedIn, and share the content with your friends, family, and networks. Thank you, and see you again on our next episode.